About a year ago there was this local ad for some Apple displays. The seller didn't seem to know much about vintage Macs and was too lazy to use Google, because apparently this was one of the displays. The ad had really crappy pictures. I couldn't tell the condition and I couldn't see the badge on the machine. But I immediately jumped on it and went on a very long drive to pick them up. This is clearly not a display, but a pretty rare Mac. I honestly wasn't aware of these Macs and didn't know what to expect. Apparently this is a 275 MHz Power Macintosh 5500. According to Wikipedia, this is the fastest of 3 black 5500s, briefly sold by Apple in 1997. The 225 MHz 5500 was sold worldwide. The 250 MHz variant was only sold in Japan and Australia. These 275 MHz machines were only sold in Europe. In this video we are going to do a complete disassembly, explore it and make sure it won't get completely destroyed by electrolyte from leaky caps. At the front of the machine it has a 24x CD-ROM drive, according to everymac.com, and the usual 1.44 diskette drive. One of the buttons here seems to be broken, so we'll try to fix it. Strangely enough, it has an international power supply. It seems they plan to sell this worldwide, but for whatever reason they never did. I left the back cover off after I checked what caps I needed to order for this video, because I don't want to stress the plastics unnecessary. Vintage Macs are a bit fragile. Moving in closer, it has some sort of video and audio connectors up here, and TV in back here. It also seems to have a modem and a network card installed. And down here we seem to have the original hard drive. There is a date on a sticker underneath the machine. Apparently it's manufactured in May of 1997. The stand seems to be missing a couple of screws. I don't see any tabs to unhook it, so I can't really guess how to remove it. The Mac cracker isn't necessary for this machine, but it fits perfectly on these screws. It looks like it might have been some covers covering up these screws, but I can't tell for sure. The screws are not making crackling noises, so I don't really know if anyone has been inside here before me. And the usual disclaimer applies, of course. Please don't mess around inside CRT displays. They may contain high voltages, even with the cord unplugged. That being said, this Mac has not been turned on since I picked it up a year ago. I never turned the machine on because I found this piece here floating around inside. I'm totally guessing here, but let's see if that was enough to remove the cover. It was, and the stand came off too. The entire machine is covered by shields, but we can see a very clean label from LG on the tube here. So that's a good start. On this side the shield is actually loose. So either someone was in a hurry in the factory, or someone else has been messing around in this machine. I can see a tiny amount of soot here, so this machine has seen some use at least. There are 2 tabs here. So now we know how to remove the front panel. I'm totally guessing here. I have obviously never worked on one of these machines. Okay, so the entire front panel is actually loose. So no need to undo these clips. They only remove this cover here from the rest of the panel. The logic board is just stuck in here and can actually be removed without removing the entire case first. Let's pull that hard drive out next. I think this is a regular IDE drive, so easy to replace if needed. The hard drive is stuck in here, so I'm gonna leave it in for now. Maybe it's easier to access once we have removed some of these shields. The TV thing is a separate module and apparently can be pulled out through the back. I think the CD-ROM drive should be pulled out through the front, but there isn't really anything to grab on to get it out. And I don't know if it should be disconnected at the back first. Yeah, that thing is pretty badly stuck in here. Let's see if the diskette drive is easier to remove. Oh, it certainly was. And the cable is long enough to pull the drive out. We definitely need to check the caps inside this drive. Maybe if I push on the drive from the back. Yeah, that did the trick. Now let's see if those cables are long enough. Oh, I see. It actually has an edge connector at the back. And some styrofoam on the edge connector. So I wonder if that drive was actually working. The drive is indeed an Apple CD24X. Manufactured in 1997, so probably the original drive. I'll clean it up and we'll have a look inside. With the diskette drive removed, perhaps I can push that hard drive out by pushing on it from the front. Yeah, that totally worked. I pushed on it with a hammer through the front panel. It has a 4 gig Quantum Fireball ST. That is what it's supposed to have according to the specs. So probably the original drive too. These are noisy buggers, but let's hope it works anyways. Now let's start removing some shields, so we can actually have a look inside this strange Mac. That was a lot of screws, but I think this shield here is loose now. I think the power supply is mounted to this shield here. So let's remove it and see if the power supply will come out. Because we need to check the caps and it might need some cleaning. No, that only removed the shield. Well, it feels like it's only held down with this screw here. So let's remove it. Yeah, that was correct. Okay, I had to remove about 10 connectors from the power supply. And good news is, caps on this power supply look fine. They are not bulging and I don't see any signs of leakage. So I'm just going to blow the dust off this power supply. And it should be good for a test. Okay, let's remove the analog board next. It's probably held in place in a similar way as the power supply. So I'll remove the shield first. And then I'll remove the screw at the back here. And if I'm not mistaken, we can now slide it out. The neck board has to come off together with the analog board. But it has of course been glued to the tube. So I'm gently gonna try to remove that glue. Okay, that worked. Neckboard is really dusty, but I can't see any bulging or leaky caps. So I'll just blow the dust off and it should be okay to test too. Well, actually the same thing with the analog board. Caps are not bulging and I don't see any signs of leakage. That makes me wonder, why is this machine so well preserved? I've seen some similar machines with caps that are leaking like crazy, but apparently not this machine. So I'll just get rid of all this dust. And this board too is okay to test. I pulled this logic board out a few weeks ago to check and order a set of caps for this board. When I did, I noticed something really bizarre with this board. Well, aside from this very strange design, none of these surface mount caps are actually leaking. That is a first for me in a Mac from this era. Maybe not all caps from this era were bad. Unfortunately, I can't see the brand on these caps. They are only stamped GLM. But I'm of course not going to risk it. We are going to replace them all. But only on the logic board. I'm not going to replace the caps on the other boards. Well, I don't see any point in removing the tube from the chassis, because with all the PCBs removed, I have good access to clean the entire machine. So I'll do some cleaning now off camera, and we'll continue with nice and clean parts. Okay, all the bits and pieces are nice and clean, and much more enjoyable to work on. Let's start with this rather strange logic board. So first it has a COM slot here. The installed modem was not standard, so that must have been an upgrade. The network card, however, was standard. It's installed in the PCI slot, with this tiny riser card here. Then it has this tiny slot here, that is new to me. So please share if you know what this is. Graphics chip is an ATI 3D Rage 2 plus DVD. It has 2 megs of VRAM, presumably these two chips here. It has some empty pads here for a ROM slot. And 1 cache slot. These machines came with 32K of level 1 cache and 256K of level 2 cache. The cache module doesn't say how large it is, but date codes corresponds to when this machine was manufactured, so probably the original 256K. Next we have two RAM slots. These Macs originally had 32 megs, but these modules doesn't say how large they are either. However, this module here has corresponding dates too, so this is probably the original 32 megs. The second module, however, has 32 written on it, and it has IBM branded chips, dated a few years earlier than when this machine was made. So this must be an upgrade. So most likely we'll have 64 megs of RAM. To the far right here we have a video in slot. So with this card here, this board actually has video in and out. It also has a very strange connector here that I don't know what it's for. This side of the board is crammed with chips too, and some empty pads here, probably for some onboard RAM. Let's pull that heatsink off, because I think we need to replace that heat paste. So this is a 275 MHz PowerPC 603E. Let's see what the condition is of this heat paste. Yeah, it's pretty dried up, but I have seen worse actually. Yeah, this isn't too bad. I've definitely seen worse than this. So this is pretty easy to clean up. I was actually able to identify the brand on some of these caps. So this big guy here is a Nichicon. It's not bipolar, because the polarity marking is on the side here, instead of the usual marking on top of the cap, like these guys have. These are just marked GLM. I tried to Google it, but couldn't find anything. This guy here is marked JKC. These 100 microfarad 6.3 volt caps, however, have a tiny Nippon Chemicon logo, and they are also marked 7K. Okay, let's start fixing things. Let's start with this mystery GLM cap that doesn't leak. This is way too close to plastic parts to even consider using the rework station. In fact, I'm gonna have to try out a new tip to be able to reach some of these pads, like this one here. This tip is so small, it's almost like a needle. I'm going to heat up the solder first. And then I'm going to add a blob of Chip Quick, one on each pad. The way Chip Quick works is that it stays molten for much longer than regular solder. So by heating up both pads, we can then push that cap off the board. However, with this tiny tip, it actually takes a bit longer than it usually does. This is normally done in a few seconds. No, this isn't working. I don't have enough thermal mass in this tiny tip. The cap may also be glued to the board. So let's try with a slightly larger tip and see how this goes. I have used this tip here many times to remove caps this size. Yeah, that worked for sure. Unfortunately, I can't reach this pad here without damaging this connector. So this could be a problem. But let's try and see how this goes. But this is really my only option, because even with this tiny tip, I can just about reach that pad. I'll try to add as much Chip Quick as possible. I'm just gonna be patient. Well, unfortunately, I skipped ahead here, but this is not working. This tip is too small to remove caps with Chip Quick. So I'm gonna have to try something else. Okay, in that case, I'm gonna go back to the larger tip. And then I'm going to melt the plastic housing to reach that pad without touching the plastic connector. Yeah, I think this is working. And this is a tight spot. Yep. Got it. And here is our big 100 microfarad 25 volt Nichicon. So if you're new to all of this, these guys here, they start leak after a while, and the electrolyte inside is corrosive, and if left for long enough it will completely destroy the board. So if you have a vintage Mac from the 90s, this is something you absolutely have to look into. Yeah, with this larger tip. This method is quick and easy. Sometimes these caps are also glued with a red splash of glue, but these caps don't seem to be glued to the board. I wasn't able to find any information about how rare these machines are, but there's only one video on YouTube about one of these Macs. That video is in German, and unfortunately YouTube's translation thingy is not the best, but I still enjoyed it. That video is more focused on using these machines and trying them out with some games. I'll clean the chip quick off with some solder wick and flux. I'll finish this off with some IPA on a Q-tip. Okay, nice and clean and ready for new caps. Well, quite a few of these caps have some really hard to reach pads. This one's going to be a challenge too. So I think I'm going to make this a little bit easier on me and remove the rest of the caps off camera. Without a huge camera on top of the board, it's at least slightly easier. So I'll skip ahead here. Sometimes some of that chip quick will end up on nearby components or pads. If that happens, you have to remove it, because chip quick will weaken that solder joint. And then I obviously have to add some fresh solder. By the way, I was supposed to take on the mystery box with components for the IBM PS2 tower project this week, but unfortunately I'm still waiting for an obsolete op-amp coming in from China. I will of course get back to that project as soon as that component arrives. Before I started to remove these caps, I took a picture so I don't have to memorize what cap goes where. Okay, all the caps are off the board, and I have to say this board was quite a lot more difficult to work on than any other board I have worked on so far. Not only all the plastic parts very close to our caps, but also other components like R27 here is less than 1 millimeter from this pad here. So I had to be extremely careful not to pull any components off the board by mistake. If you take on one of these boards, go slow and be patient. I'll add some flux to all the pads first. And then I add the cap, minding the polarity of course. I checked and the polarity is clearly marked on this board. But that is not always the case, so always check before you start removing caps. I'm gonna go back to the smallest tip again. And since we're using a good flux here, I can place the blob of solder on the tip. And then place that blob on the pad. This method only works if you're using a good flux. That actually didn't work. I had to switch to this larger tip here, because this skinny tip here just can't hold enough heat. But I think my new caps here are slightly smaller than the old ones, so it wasn't too hard to reach in here with that larger tip. Next up we have that beefy Nichicon. As you can see, it's quite a bit larger than all the other caps. My replacement cap is quite large too, but not quite as large as the original Nichicon. That means it should be quite a bit easier to reach that pad. And it certainly was. The last cap in this row is a 47 micro 16 volt cap too. This is the most common value I found in vintage Macs, so I always keep a large stash of these. Okay, so the first row of caps is finished with good flux and a good tip. This is an easy job. Okay, I went ahead and installed all the 47 micro 16 volt caps on this board and skipped ahead a bit. This board had 12 of these. The remaining 5 caps are 100 micro 6 volts. Correction, these are actually 6.3 volt caps. I'll clean up the flux right away. And later, when this video is done, I'm going to give this board a proper wash. Okay, those were the last 2 caps. This board had 18 caps in total, by the way. So the next step is to add some fresh heat paste. It's so tiny compared to more modern CPUs. And then we can reattach the heatsink and the fan. And it just snaps into place into some holes in the PCB. This riser card, by the way, is a bit of a fail, because with the card installed, it pretty much blocks all the air to go through that fan. I'll put that cache module back in, and the 2 RAM sticks. We might as well reinstall that video board too. Next up we have the diskette drive, and this is a Panasonic drive, by the way. Hopefully all the caps inside here are just as nice as the caps in the rest of the machine. Let's pull that lid off and find out. Well, it's a bit dusty, but not too bad. I can only see 1 electrolytic cap, and it's a through-hole cap that isn't leaking, so I'm gonna leave it in. I have only restored slightly older drives than this, so I don't know if these drives have any issues. If you have more experience than me with these Panasonic drives, then please let me know if they have any common issues. But for now I'm just going to blow out that dust, and I'd say it's okay to test. Next up we have the CD-ROM drive. I find it a bit strange that this machine has an ID hard drive, but I went with SCSI for the CD-ROM drive. Why not just use ID or SCSI for both drives? In any case, let's have a look inside and make sure everything is okay. So let's pull that lid off and see what we will find. I think the PCB is stuck in the front panel, so let's open up that drive manually. Well, the drive is very clean inside. Well, it's still jammed in something, so I'll remove these 2 screws on the PCB and see if that helps. Well, that didn't make a difference, but I think we have some tabs inside these holes. Sure enough, sneaky Apple hiding away those tabs. Well, what a strange design. But I think there are 2 more tabs that we need to push on. Yeah, definitely. How unusual. I have been inside quite a few drives, but this was the first. These tabs are really difficult to unhook. Okay, finally. That took a while. Yeah, this is really clean. This drive hasn't seen much use. It just has the tiniest amount of dust. This drive is going to clean up with just some compressed air. Well, I was hoping we would remove this PCB here, but unfortunately I think it's soldered to something here. Probably the motor. By bending on the PCB gently, I can actually see 7 electrolytics. And I can also see that they are not leaking either. So I'm going to leave those caps in, at least for now. And if I find out that those caps tend to leak, then I'll try to desolder that PCB and replace them. This is, by the way, probably just a regular SCSI drive. So if I'm not mistaken, we can probably pull this edge connector off and install it in pretty much any SCSI drive from this era. Oh, I think we have a problem. This rubber pad here has gone all sticky. The CD that was in the drive has some of that gunk too. So that's a bit of an issue. Let me try to wipe it with IPA. Yeah, it's definitely coming off. It looks like rubberized paint, like on the compact laptops we have restored on the channel. So this could be a problem, because if it is it necessary? Because if it's necessary, how the heck do we reapply fresh rubberized paint on a disc inside a drive? Yeah, I'm getting all sticky by just touching this stuff. It has gone absolutely disgusting. So the only thing I can do right now is to remove it and see if this drive will work without. Well, even after cleaning, it's still a bit sticky. So hopefully it will grip the CD. I guess we need to find out. This piece here has not gone sticky because there was a CD inside the drive. Oh, I wasn't paying attention. It actually clearly says Matsushita here. And the model number is CR508C. There is one more thing we need to take care of before we can do the reassembly. I don't know if these machines need a battery to boot, so let's install one just in case. I have seen this type of batteries in other machines and they don't seem to leak, so that is great of course. However, they are 4.5 volt batteries, so that's a bit weird. We could use a pack with 1.5 volt batteries and reach 4.5 volts. But I have seen what happens to those batteries when left for long enough, so that is not an option. 4.5 volts is really strange voltage, so I think that motherboard regulates it down to 3.3 volts. In that case, it may actually work with a coin cell. A single coin cell will not last as long, but that's not a real issue. These are quick and easy to replace. So I'll move the two wires with a connector to this battery holder here. The original battery is not rechargeable, so we don't need a diode. And then I'm going to cover these two connectors with some heat shrink and cut that third leg off. I'll cover the battery with some tape for now, and then we'll find a better solution later. This is good enough for a test. And it's finally time for the reassembly. The first thing to go in is going to be the fan. I removed it to clean it. This machine also has a temperature sensor mounted on top of the fan. So this is probably not a very noisy machine. Next I'm going to reinstall the analog board. So I need to reconnect all of these connectors. To avoid mixing them up, I tend to take pictures before I disconnect any board in a CRT display. Okay, with some help from the pictures I took, the analog board is now back in the machine. Without too much guesswork, some of the cables are a bit short, so it's not the easiest machine to reassemble either. And lastly, we can reconnect and reinstall the neck board. I reinstalled some shields off camera, not to bore you, so we can reinstall the logic board next. Next up we have the diskette drive, the toolless diskette drive, and the toolless CD-ROM drive without sticky rubberized paints. I just realized something here. The original hard drive may contain some hard to find software, so I think I'm going to put it aside for now. And once the machine is tested and working, I will install it and immediately retrieve any of that software, if necessary. I haven't checked yet if it's available online, or what software we might need for the special features of this machine. Who knows, maybe this drive only has one power-up left in it. Let's not risk it. Okay, we're ready for the first test. This machine came without the keyboard and the mouse, unfortunately. It would have had a matching black keyboard and mouse. Okay, let's flip that switch. Okay, we've got high voltage. That is always a good start. This is the microphone, by the way. It mounts into the chassis, so that's why it's hanging loose. Okay, fingers crossed. Oh, we've got a chime. The fan is spinning. And we are getting something on the screen. Awesome. It is a bit dim though. So how do I adjust it? But you should be able to see that we've got a question mark. And the mouse is working too. And it doesn't sync too well with the camera. Let me see if I can fix it. But this project is off to a good start. I left the display on for just a few seconds. Now it's actually bright enough. So I'm not sure anymore if it needs any adjustments. If it does, we'll fix it later. Maybe it just needed to wake up from a very long sleep. This machine has probably been turned off for about 20 years. Let's try with a random boot diskette. And see if that diskette drive works. Maybe not. We got a happy Mac. But the disk came out. Let's try another disk. Well, at least the eject works. That is a good thing. Let's test that CD-ROM drive. I have not prepared any software for this system, So I'm just testing with some stuff I have laying around. Well, it spins up. I don't actually know if that disk even works. But let's try to boot from that disk and see what happens. Well, this kind of sucks. Trying to test the system with untested disks. I will of course download and create proper disks for this machine. Okay, this briefly gave us a happy Mac, and then the disk came out. No, this totally sucks. So let me download and prepare some disks before we move on and test the system. While we wait for Mac OS to download, let's install the hard drive. This is from a large donation from viewer tab mode. So thank you for watching this. All that stuff is slowly finding its way into different machines. It's new old stock. So let's cut that bag and pull that nice and shiny Hitachi Desk Star from 2005. The original drive was just 2 gig. So this 41 gig drive is quite an upgrade. I guess we could see this as a very late upgrade. That loose piece I found inside the machine, I think is supposed to sit here to lock the network card. I'm not sure, but it kind of looks like it fits here. Someone will probably correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong. I don't have the original screw, of course, but luckily a regular PC screw seems to fit perfectly. Next up we have the TV and radio tuner. It slides into its own slot. I don't know what the best procedure is to reinstall the cover, so I'm gonna have to guess here. And I'm actually going to start with the stand. The screws were missing, so I'm going to borrow the 2 screws from the cover at the back. The biggest issue I've seen with vintage Macs are fragile plastics. So if you decide to restore one of these, be careful with all the covers. I'm going to secure it with some sticky tape, because if it falls off, it's quite likely to crack. There is a manual for these machines online, so I guess I could have checked. But apparently, guessing works too. And now we can reinstall all screws. In plastic cases, I turn the screws counterclockwise until I get a clicky noise. That way I know I'm in the old thread. And I also make sure not to over tighten the screws. The last screw is a bit tricky to reach now when the Mac is standing up on its stand. But that totally works. Before I reinstall the back cover, I'm going to add some PTFE on these tabs, since these cases are known to be fragile. If it slides on easily, it's much less likely that it will crack. Okay, this is actually the last part to go in. Oh, let's hope this machine actually works too. I hope it doesn't need any repair, because we don't have time for a repair this week. Since we snatched 2 of the screws for the stand, I only have 1 screw left to install at the back here. But that should be good enough. Originally it also had 1 screw here and 1 here. Okay, let's put a CD in that tray and see if it works. The CD is tested. We've got a happy Mac. Yes, it works. Well, at least it boots. I did some reading online, and my conclusion was that Mac OS 9.1 is probably the best choice for these machines. The CD-ROM drive is quite noisy, but that's probably normal. With the bezel on, we can also see that this display needs some adjustment. I checked online, and to adjust the CRT, these machines require a special cable. Your clock is not set to the correct time. Well, we'll check later if that battery works. I'm just gonna skip it for now. This disk is unreadable. Do you want to initialize it? We sure do. I'm gonna switch to Mac OS Extended. We're getting 38 gigs out of that Desk Star. It's too bad about that flickering on camera. Here in real life, that image is perfectly stable. Looks pretty nice actually. Okay, I'll skip ahead here unless something interesting happens. Okay, this totally worked. Your Macintosh clock is set to a year before 1973. So let's take care of that clock and see if our bodged battery works. Current date 1956. Man, this Mac is much older than I thought. Okay, I'll shut down the system and pull that cord out and wait for a few minutes. Okay, Mac has been powered off for about 10 minutes. Yeah, that totally works. It still remembers the time and date. So apparently a regular coin cell is enough to power the clock in this machine. It won't last as long as the original battery, of course. But this is a way better solution than other options. Highest recommended resolution is 832 by 624 at 75 Hz. That is really weird. I'm gonna set it to 800 by 600 for comparability. And I'm also going to increase to millions of colors. Yeah, that looks really nice. Actually, I just realized if we change to 800 by 600 at 60 Hz, I think I can sync my camera to this. Yes! Awesome! So now you guys don't have to watch that nasty flickering. Okay, next I did some reading, and I think I found the software to try out at least some of the weird features of this machine. So I downloaded Apple Video Player 1.7.2. This is also a good time to test that diskette drive. Well, it reads. It totally works. I'll decompress the file, install it and skip ahead. Okay, one of the weird features of this machine is the video in back here. So we should actually be able to connect the Commodore 64 to this Mac. This is really silly, but let's have some fun and try this out. However, if Wikipedia is correct, and these machines were in fact only sold in Europe, then this must be a PAL machine, and may not work with NTSC, but no need to wonder, let's find out. Let's start with the Commodore 64 PAL machine, since that is the most likely machine to work with this strange Mac. Well, that is a weird combination, if I ever seen one. Commodore 64 keyboard with the black Mac. So let's turn that Commodore on and launch Apple Video Player 172. I'm totally guessing here. Okay, I found some sort of control panel here, and I can switch from TV to video here. Oh, it works! Here's our Commodore 64. But unfortunately it's monochrome. It's black and white. Can we go larger? Wow, that looks really crappy. Also, this is very strange. If this is a PAL machine, why isn't it showing the colors from the PAL Commodore 64? Well, in that case, let's do a test with an NTSC machine, aka Blue Garbled number 6. Okay, let's turn it on and see what we get. Oh, we've got colors! What's going on here? These machines were only sold in PAL countries, but apparently this Mac is NTSC. Not a very good one, I have to say. It's a bit blurry, but it's totally usable for some retro gaming. Let's have a look in the settings. Maybe we can increase the resolution. Okay, we've got preferences here. Movie compression. Oh, I see. The software is actually set to NTSC. And we've got the option of PAL and CCAM too. Well, I guess we need to try it. I don't have a Commodore 64 CCAM, but we do have a PAL. So let's switch. And it went to black and white, as expected. Image also a bit messed up. So let's switch back to the other machine. Okay, let's try the PAL machine again. And it's got colors. Okay, this totally works. I can't see a way of going full screen. I only have smallest size, normal size and largest size. Oh, now it went to full screen. Awesome! Well, the resolution isn't good enough for basic. but it's probably good enough to play some games. What a bizarre combination. And the delivery guy just stopped by with the chip from New Japan Radio Co. Ltd. This is the missing obsolete op-amp that I mentioned earlier, so we're all set for the next video. If you're watching this next week, there will be a link to that video on the screen shortly. If you're watching this fresh, hit the bell icon below and set it to all. And that was a good time to watch the video where we restored the massive IBM PS2 tower, if you haven't watched it yet. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next week.